I'll take you to the crash of 1987. So the big crash, other than the 1929 crash, was 1987, and I was on the floor of the exchange that day. It was probably
wow. What
one
did
of
they
the
call that? Black
craziest.
Monday, or was the name for
Yeah,
it?
yeah, Black Monday, and then
Yeah.
Tuesday was crazy, and
So you were
literally
there on the floor when
I
that
was on the
happened.
floor. We left the floor on Tuesday. So the market crashed on Monday. It opened up a lot on Tuesday, then went straight down. And we left the exchange because we thought there were more people wandering Wall Street than there were on the floor of the exchange.
Everybody, welcome back to Digging In. Have an amazing guest today, and the timing couldn't be any more perfect. I have Larry Benedict. Larry is a seasoned financial guy. He's a hedge fund guy. He's worked on the CME, the Amex. He's going to talk all about his background in terms of trading and maybe making some money, maybe losing some money. But as we head into some pretty uncertain and maybe some crazy times, I'm looking forward to what Larry has to say. So Larry, welcome to the show, man. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Matt. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Listen, we've talked so much before we hit the record button, that we can start anywhere with your story, but we know that you've had tremendous success, and I know you're going to get to that point in your story with us, but take me back to the beginning, before you were the guy that everybody knows now, and tell me how it started and kind of what led you to where you are.
Sure. It's a bit of a bumpy ride, but I'll start you way back. So I grew up in New York. I grew up in a town called Roslyn in Long Island. Actually, going back to a long time ago, I don't want to date myself, and you'll know how old I am, but the early 70s, it was a very unique place to grow up. It was upper middle class, but nobody kind of knew that. And our group of guys who, out of my high school graduating class, so many of us have done nicely. And I think that's because we were driven in a way that I really can't explain. And I don't see it as much nowadays for our own kids, etc. Even though we had access to a lot of different things, the world was different. So I would say it started, growing up in that environment with a very focused bunch of guys. We didn't really care about, money or anything like that. We just wanted to play ball and, have a lot of fun. So that was good. But in the middle,
that was like middle class. Like, what was it like where you grew up? Were you in inner city? Were you like in a nice neighborhood?
No. Roslyn was, home to, Bernie Madoff, obviously, which I grew up with those boys, but nobody ever knew anything. But people were affluent, but nobody knew. Very different than the world we live in today in Boca Raton, where, kids are looking at exotic sports cars, etc. We didn't have any of that, and the people were very, affluent. So I'd say it was different. But then in 1972-3, my parents got divorced, and we stayed in the town, but my mom got remarried, and my stepfather was, I wouldn't say, he was hard on us, but he instilled like a certain work ethic, value proposition that my brother and I have one brother who's 3 years younger than me. And then we adopted step siblings, only one who lived with us. But we were brought up a different way. So I would say it started, back in those days where, if my stepfather lent me $20, he was asking for it back.
Oh yeah, I can relate to that for sure. And the thing is, you grew up like so it wasn't like you guys were struggling,
No, no.
But there was a mentality.
No, I would say we were lower in the scheme of what was going on, but we were fine. My stepfather was an attorney. He supported us, and everything was good for us. But I think my brother and I were instilled like this drive that we had to succeed at all costs. And, the journey was long. Knock on wood, it's been successful so far. But it started way, way back from where we grew up and how we grew up. And, I went to Syracuse University. I got to Syracuse. I looked around. I went with 3 buddies from high school, and I was in the business school. And I realized like week 2 that if I didn't do work, I was not going to be there. So sort of kicked in, did okay there, and then progressed on from there.
You mentioned a little while ago that I'm not sure how you said it exactly, but the gist was it was different back then, and it was different. I mean, we're about 10 years apart in age, even though you look younger than I do.
Thank you.
The hair helps. But there was something different in certain 70s, 80s. I don't know what it was. Maybe it wasn't even the time, because as you're speaking about what it was like when you grew up, 3 things I wrote down were, number 1, you're driven. You talked about work ethic, and you talked about the same thing, which is work hard. And where we live now, we do see a very different thing with a lot of these kids that are growing up now. It's not so hard, maybe. So maybe there is a lot to be said for being in a situation where you do need to work hard. Either you survive, you make something happen, or nothing happens. Like, nobody's going to hand it to you. Right. And so you went after whatever it was you wanted to make happen, and you got to college and you're like, I better start working. Like, that clicked in your head. It doesn't click for everybody.
100%, because my brother and I were misguided early, on through a bad divorce. And then I got up there and I'm like, you know what? This has got to work. But I think getting back to what you were saying about, I have 3 boys, 30, 27, and going to be 21. And I think the way they're growing up is very, very different than anything that we had. And I would say, I don't think it's good, but
I don't think so either.
We'll see how all of that turns out, because everybody's worried about what everybody else has, I think, in the environment that we're in. So I think in a way it's hard for these kids to, really buckle down and become successful on their own,
Yeah. And this is something that I think about every so often. So what we hear might be happening around us, depending on what news you watch, how much fear we believe we should be living with right now. There's really, if you think about people your age, my age, actually probably your age and older, they were alive and maybe can remember bad times like the 70s. But beyond that, people that were born in the 80s, 90s, like all these, they don't know. They really don't know. There hasn't really been bad times, hard times, a couple of pullbacks, a couple of things that have been tough. But like, if you don't have the ability to work hard, stay focused, and like make it happen, you could really have a problem if the economy really turns the way they're predicting. Like, it's time to buckle down for real.
Oh, listen, 100%. I do think though that hits guys or families around our age worse than it hits the younger guys. Like, they're willing to take way more chances. Obviously they don't have
True.
kids. So like my kids, I would say, are more risky which is okay at this point in time than they will be when they get strapped down with 1, 2, 3 kids, etc., and have to, pay for a lot of stuff. But it's a very hard environment. I mean, as you know, which we'll probably get into, economy and housing prices and affordability and all of that stuff makes it, I think, really hard for our kids. I don't know if they're going to have appreciation in housing you know, the way we were able to, I don't know if, you know, their salaries are going to go up. My middle son is in law school. He got a job out of law school. He's not starting. He has one more year of law school. He starts after that. He's already gotten 2 or 3 raises, and he hasn't even started, because that's what's going on in the world, right? Yeah, because they have to retain the people. It's, I mean, this is the first time in my career that I'm really sitting. I mean, I have help around me that work with me, but really, I've always had an assistant that work with me 24/7 every day of the week to make sure everything is going smoothly for me. And I don't have that right now. It's very difficult to find. No one wants to work. Yeah, they look at the guy next to them making so much more money, and they're like, why aren't I trading Bitcoin or whatever it is? And it's you know, it's a different environment right now. So I'm sort of solo in my office, which is interesting.
So take me through, and by the way, thank you for like laying that foundation, because there is, first of all, we do this show because whether somebody's watching it when it first comes out or they're watching it a year from now, it's about helping people, right? So you and I are just doing this together because somebody's going to hear something, and you already gave 3 pieces of gold: being driven, having a work ethic, but also just knowing you've got to work hard. And what I just took away from something you just said was the ability to adapt, right? Because as things are changing, you do need to be able to kind of zoom out and be able to adapt and have some sense of making good decisions, whether it's about housing or buy and hold or buying Bitcoin. Like, the decisions that you make in your 20s or 30s right now, you look back in 10 years and be like, oh, wow, that decision I made, look where it left me. Let me give you an example. In 2008, I bought a house from Bank of America. In 2010, it was a foreclosure. That was a long time ago. That house appreciated. I rented it out. So this cash flow was doing great. Then we moved to Florida. I sold that house, did a 1031 exchange, bought a house down here. But of course, because I had all that profit in the house, my payment here is way lower. So the cash flow is higher. It was a 15-year process, whatever that math was. It's like, what I've learned is at that time, I could have been in the market. I could have done a lot of things, but that slow, steady investment in a cash flowing asset worked for me. You know,
Oh,
that's just me.
listen,
That was just me.
I mean, real estate has been a real gift over the last bunch of years. You know, talking about just Florida itself, since I've been in Florida since 1993, and I've seen, I wouldn't say everything, because obviously there was stuff before it, but I remember coming down to Boca Raton in college, and Glades Road, which is one of the main roads here, ended at the turnpike. Literally ended. Wow. So they built.
Wait, how could that be? The whole world is on the other side of the turnpike now.
I understand, but that's what's going on. I'm telling you, we used to go on our break to the Holiday Inn, which is still right there by. There was a place called Pete Rose's back when the kids were young. He owned a restaurant here, and that was pretty much the end of the road in the early 80s to mid 80s, and then it's gone way farther. So I've seen a lot of stuff. I would tell you, up until the last 4 or 5 years, real estate wasn't really the greatest investment down here. But it has become that. It's gone astronomical, and it's still going, which is shocking to me.
It really is.
We had in the neighborhood I live in last week, they had a record sale, highest price ever paid in the neighborhood. So I still think there's an inherent demand. I guess it's because people want to be here, and a lot of companies are moving out of cities. Citadel, which is the largest hedge fund in the world, just moved their headquarters from Chicago to Miami. So people want out of these big, unsafe cities to come to cities that are large, but they feel are safer. So, you know,
have
we've
you heard
seen
about the, I don't want to mention the name, but there's a country club that's large, which you know very well. who I believe is actually hiring my company to come in and do cybersecurity for them. So in speaking with the club manager, the CEO over there, he drove me around to the other facility they have and pointed out, which I didn't know, that in that one section of Boca over there, they're creating like a technology zone or center, and they already have, it's blocks long, and they have, I mean, every major tech company in the US is already slated to come in there. And that's mine. He was mentioning Amazon, he's mentioning Apple, he was going down the list. And he knows because his club is obviously talking to some of those people that bring him in. But when he told me that, I'm like, wow, this is like Silicon Valley. It's like they're making Boca Raton into like the center of the universe for IT. Did you know that?
Yeah. Yeah, actually, yeah, I know that a lot of companies are coming in. I'll tell you, when we first moved down here, we had the opposite. So if you go down Spanish River Boulevard, and IBM's headquarters for their Southeast region was in Boca Raton. That whole area now where it's on Yamato, it goes, it's like the industrial, I forgot what they call it, Everglades Plaza, whatever it is. That used to be IBM, but then they shut it down and it was empty for years. And now it's obviously sold out. But listen, what better place would you want to be than South Florida? It's a great place to raise your family. There's, you know, for most people, not all, but most people, there's no commute involved in getting to work, which growing up in New York and Long Island, it's, you know, it's a destruction to do that to yourself every day. So can't complain being down here, but we sure have seen a lot.
I want to get a little deeper into talking about you. And we just did a great job, if we were in real estate, of selling Boca Raton. So anybody who's interested, come to us. We'll find you a realtor.
Exactly.
Now let's talk about, I mean, you've got so much experience on those exchanges, and that whole thing is such a mystery to people. But, you know, looking back over the decades and all the experience you have, and I'm not asking you to give financial advice because we're not doing that, but have you seen patterns of maybe what people could be or should be thinking about if they're just focused on long-term and just not losing their money? Without giving advice,
I would say,
some pointers.
I would say, so I would say on that level, do you want me to walk back to like how I got involved in the business, where I started, how
I would love for you to do that. I thought you skipped over it on purpose. Go back.
No.
I'd love to.
So basically, I was at Syracuse. I was a senior in college. I didn't really have any idea what I was going to do. I dated a girl from Chicago. I'd never been there before. I went to visit during a holiday, and the dad said, "Hey, do you want to come to work, see what I do?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sounds good." I went to it was like the movie Trading Places with Eddie Murphy.
Yeah.
So I go to the floor, and it's bedlam. It's yelling and screaming. It was just the coolest thing that I ever saw in my life. It was exciting. People were aggressive. It was like the perfect place for me. And I'm like, you know what? I don't really know what this is, but the dad only works 10 to 1, and he was very financially successful. I'm like, I got to do this. Whatever it is, I got to get in. Well, fast forward 30 plus years later, I don't know if it was a good decision, but it was a painful decision. So I moved to Chicago. I started trading. I started clerking on the floor for an individual, and I was getting paid, I think, $800 a month. And
wow.
But people were not getting paid. People were doing it just to get involved. And I'll fast forward you just for a second so you can understand this, and then we'll go back. So what's really weird for me is my kids, nobody understands what this is an era in time that has been taken away. So the way the financial markets used to work was, I would call it more inefficient, yelling and screaming, writing down on a piece of paper, pretty much an honor system. Now it's all algorithms that are running the stock market on a daily basis, which is hard to really grasp. But going back
During your time, you're saying no computers when you first
at the
started.
very beginning, no real computers. The computer was as big as the office you're sitting in, you know, to get, they had information and stuff was being printed out, but when you made a trade, you had to put your card into something and they key punched it with key, you know, they had, talk about a area that's gone. There were hundreds of key punch operators that operated with the exchange. They had probably had 500 to 1,000 key punch operators.
What was this in the 80s?
This was, I started in 1984. And
right at the cusp of when computers were kind of starting to happen. You probably what, 5 years out.
Right around there. There was, but I remember when I first started, we were charting, and the piece of paper the gentleman who I was working for was using to chart was like it would like be like a long 50 thing sheet of graph paper that we were, you know, filling out on a daily basis. So
like for technical analysis, like you were doing it on paper.
just so he would see where the markets were and he would chart. So it's you know, it's evolved completely. But so I started, I really loved it. I was probably not good at it or inexperienced. I would tell you back then, it took 5 years, 3 to 5 years to really figure out what's going on. Now people think they want to know in 5 minutes. Yeah. And what's interesting about that is people don't want to pay the dues that you pay. So anyway, so I wanted to start trading. So I went to my grandparents and they gave me $15,000, which was enough to trade with back then. I started trading. This is probably 1985, 86. And I just really couldn't make money. And I had a buddy who was next to me and he was making all kinds of money. And I remember I said to my mother, I'm like, Mom, Andy's making all this money and I can't make any money. I just don't understand it. She goes, just do what he does. Well, it didn't work that way. So like when he was buying, I was buying, then he was selling, but it took a bunch of years to really get to a place of stability. And it took from that probably 1985. I'll take you to the crash of 1987. So the big crash, other than the 1929 crash, was 1987, and I was on the floor of the exchange that day. It was probably
one of the craziest. Black Monday, or was the name?
Yeah, Black Monday, and then Tuesday was crazy. And
so you were there on the floor when that
I was on the floor. We left the floor on Tuesday, so the market crashed on Monday. It opened up a lot on Tuesday, then went straight down. And we left the exchange because we thought there were more people wandering Wall Street than there were on the floor of the exchange. It was just,
I want to slow this part down right here. Do you remember during that time, first of all, what was the reason for that? And was it similar to what's happening now, or was it something specific to that time?
I mean, it's interesting in the market, they make excuses or reasons during or after it happens. So a lot of that reason, they called it portfolio insurance, where people needed to buy put options to hedge the portfolio. And then they, were looking at the Japanese trade deficit with Japan, which no longer really means anything, but that was a catalyst. But I think really the catalyst was over speculation. At the time, a lot of people involved, a lot of retail, but that was the most unbelievable couple of days, especially that Monday, that I've ever seen.
What did that feel like? Do you remember how you felt? Like, were you scared shit? Like,
well, I lost. It was so I was trading for a big independent firm, a gentleman who actually passed away. He was an adventurist. He flew hot air balloons around the world and whatever. So I traded with him and I put up money, he put up money, and our account went basically to zero. A lot of people went
15 grand your grandparents gave you was gone?
Yeah, that was already gone. We already lost that. Then I went to work for a firm And then during the crash, the account went to zero. So I had to sort of start again. And then by 1989, I went to a company called Spear Leeds and Kellogg, which you may have heard of, and probably not unless you were really in the business. But we were bought. I was with that firm for 11 years. That's where I really honed the craft, really picked up on the market, and realized that I was good at doing this. And
can I
what
pause you
really-
right there for 1 sec?
Yes.
Because this is going to be good where you're about to go, but I just was curious. So that 87 crowd, when you said that you went down to zero, you're talking about you were working for a company, they were managing people's money and they lost all. Is that what happened?
No. So
or was it your money?
They had all my money and the money they put up for me. So it wasn't a ton of money, but let's say it was 50 grand or 100 grand, but that was everything. So I had to sort of look around for another job. And then I hooked into this company called Spear Leeds and Kellogg. So I went there in 1989. And then I found, which is very critical for people to understand, I think it's really important. You have to get a mentor in anything you do. It's one of the most important things. It really, really is. So I got lucky enough to find a mentor at the time who realized that I had talent at what I was doing. But when you talk about our kids, I was probably too risky or aggressive for what I needed to be. And he helped me sort of get the discipline to understand how to make money, how to make this a business, and how to make it consistent. So really, when you look at the takeaway from all of that experience, I got lucky to get stability in 1989 working for a big company. But really, what gave me the stability was the mentor who really, even though we went at it toe to toe every day, because it's a very aggressive business, he really worked on helping me hone my skill and understand by watching him how to do it. So I would say
he believed in you, boy. Like he really believed in you. He saw something in you.
I don't know why.
Did you see in yourself? No, kidding aside, did you see in yourself what he saw, or were you just like, you just wanted to, like, you were just going, like, you got to work, you got to do something. This guy sees me and sees something in me. Let me just go with it.
Yeah. Well, listen, yes, but I would it's funny. So I've hired over my career hundreds of traders to trade with me. And I always said, what makes up the makeup of a great trader? So I always thought maybe professional athlete, very, very bright, but having the ability to, be able to not be that bright. Like a lot of the brighter guys from Harvard, et cetera, they weren't able to do it. Now it's an algorithm, so they're great at it because they can program, do whatever. Back then, there was a human emotion involved, and they never really had that, a lot of guys. But it was really, really hard for me to find what made up a great trader. I felt in myself, for people that know me, especially back then, I was probably the most aggressive, will to win guy out there.
Really?
Like, beyond.
So you're saying number one, because I'm putting top three right here. You're saying number one is being aggressive?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And you can't teach that to somebody. That you are, that's who you are.
Yes. And you got to find that. And people have that. I was the kind of guy in, let's say, 8th grade, we were playing kickball and basically I would be pissed off that we lost. So I would take first base and leave.
Is that kind of like take your ball and go home?
Exactly.
He takes the base and goes home.
I was that guy. I'm no longer that guy, which is interesting because, I play some competitive sports, but I don't get mad. But 15 years ago, 10 years ago, very aggressive, wanted to win at all costs. But I think you need that in almost anything that you do on a business level, because listen, you're gonna go against a lot of obstacles that you're gonna have to climb over.
So a
So
great trader is aggressive and wants to win. Give me number two. Give me the top three characteristics.
okay. Will to win.
Gold right here.
Okay, will to win. Okay. 2, disciplined, but yet risky, which, sounds like the opposite, but someone that's willing to take risk.
It's actually not the opposite. Those two things, by the way, what you're giving me is also the secrets to a successful entrepreneur and business owner. And I don't mean somebody who starts a business and fails. I mean somebody who actually is able to build a business that really stays in business and works. You have to have an aggressive desire to win. You have to be disciplined, but be willing to take risks. So what you're talking about is calculated risk. You're not just taking risk, like
100%. And in a lot of my stuff that has been written about me, if you ever pick it up to read it, you'll see the exact word that you just used is my mantra. I took massive risk, but it was calculated risk. Now, a lot of people couldn't take that risk, but I was able to mentally calculate that risk and thought that it was a good risk to take.
That mental toughness is, I don't know if it's on your list, but that's something that I find is necessary also. I mean, that's why there's so few successful people in business or in certain fields, like that mental toughness. And that's also why I want to hear about your upbringing. As you're talking now, as a kid, you had mental toughness. It was always there. And
it was a little scary, but yeah.
Right. So it is necessary. Like it's so necessary. And being aggressive, wanting to win, having discipline, and taking risk, that all is mental toughness. But there's an
100%.
awareness.
I
Like you
think
know what you're doing.
Again, I've been in other businesses, but really finance has been my career. But I believe probably in all these businesses, you need it. But this is a different business now. It's a lot different than it used to be. Because
Can I just
I
tell
was
you something?
explaining.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but when I first started out in IT, my first job was working at Deutsche Bank at the World Trade Center.
Oh,
And
boy.
I had to do IT support. It wasn't out of the gate, but I think I was like 6 months or a year in when I learned a little bit. They put me on the trading floor, right? And that was like 1998. These guys used to throw keyboards at me. They would throw their mice at me if I didn't move fast. They were nuts. And they would all be walking around with like baseball bats and golf clubs, like with headset. I mean, it was like, it was a weird environment, but I'm telling you, they were so aggressive and they were like, every second mattered. Like you had to move faster than was even possible.
Let me tell you what, I have my share of broken phones. I've definitely, I understand that. It's a unbelievable business. It's very different now. Kids are very different that are in it. It's all computers. So, really looking at what it was a blip in time that lasted probably about 20, 25, probably longer. But from when I was in it, it was probably 1984 to 2007, 2008, where it was the trading floor, yelling and screaming. I mean, if you came to my office, you'd see a phone on my head, a phone over here, I'd be on 3 phones. Literally, my phone doesn't ring once during the day. Everything that we do is through Bloomberg IM chat. Everything is chatting. You never get to see what anyone looks like. You never get to even hear the voice. So, the business has changed, but those experiences are sort of what galvanized, my career in trading.
Listen, by the way, I want to thank you for giving me that list, because that's so valuable. If nothing else comes out of somebody listening to this, those characteristics about making a great trader, again, are the same ones that make somebody great in any business, no matter what you choose. And by the way, you mentioned 87, the crash, and then you mentioned 89 when you kind of moved to that new firm and had the mentor, but there's 2 years in between there. And I was going to ask you before, what kept you in it, during such a tough time, but you already answered me because the answer is mental toughness.
Yeah, I just did whatever and people always ask me, why'd you keep going? Why didn't you were a loser? You always lost. Why didn't, it's just because I never wanted to give up. And I always saw at the end of the rainbow that there would be an opportunity to be really good. And I always tell this story. So everyone always asks me in the business, hey, what was your best trading day ever? They always want to know what your best day is, what your worst day is. And they always want to hear the money. How much money did you make in a day? How much did you lose? And I always say this, my best day ever trading, ever, was when I made $1,000. Ever.
Why was that your best day?
Because at that point I realized I could do it. I never made money. And then all of a sudden I made $1,000. I'm like, holy cow.
You can win. You can do it.
And it's very funny because my old CEO, when I had my hedge fund going, used to walk into me the end of December every year, and he had a crinkled up piece of paper that he folded up and he handed to me, and I'd open it up and I'm like, what's this number? He's like, that's what you have to make next year. And I'm like, okay, you make it. If you think it's so easy, you do it. he would do that every year when he was with me almost 10 years. And every year he walked in, but the numbers exponentially grew massive. But I'm telling you, the most important day, and it's probably whether you're an entrepreneur, trader, etc., it's when you feel like you couldn't do what you're doing. When, there are guys that have probably massive companies, and when they turn the corner, whatever that was the opportunity for them to realize the confidence in themselves to take it to the next level. Because it then was $1,000 a day, then 10, then 100, then 1,000,000, whatever it was, but it never meant as much because it was just a number on a piece of paper. The numbers
so
were
interesting.
But that's the fact. I mean, that is the fact in any business, I think.
It's almost like when you do get to that point of financial success or whatever that might be for an individual, you get that car, you get that house, or that piece of jewelry, but then you got it. It's like, well, now I know I can keep doing it. It's like that feeling is hard to replicate over and over and over because you just showed yourself you can do it. Now it becomes like, how many more times can I do it? And how big can I get it? So now you're competing against yourself.
Right. But it's interesting when you mention what you can get, like what happens, and maybe I'm probably too old for this podcast, but when you get to be a certain age, all of that stuff is meaningless. Like whatever car I had, or it's not the same as what it was. Like once you have it once, it almost becomes a pain in the ass. Like when you go in the garage and you try to start whatever car it is and it doesn't start, you're like, this sucks. Like I don't need this aggravation. So yes, I would call it potentially at the beginning, like you would call it a trophy, like you're rewarding yourself for your success. But as life goes on, it's very interesting. And for people that have kids and kids that are getting older, you're only as happy as your least happy kid. So, it translates at some point from you to your family or to your kids, because and doesn't matter now what I did. Now I just hope all my kids are okay, on their own. So that's, it's part of the transition from, I call it yourself to like your kids. And then I say now at my age, I'm almost back to me. So in the next couple of years, it's all going to be about me.
The reason that I like to have people that are seasoned on and interview them is because the people that may watch this who are 20s, 30s, 40s, whatever, who are still kind of finding their way. It's not, I don't really believe personally, I'm going to be 50 in a few months. It's not until the past few years that I really started to connect with things you're saying. They all just started kind of happening where I'm thinking that the same way that you just described it, but I didn't think that way until I was like in my mid 40s. It was always like aggressive, win, win, win at all costs. And like you leave a lot of shrapnel along the way. There's relationships, there's people you could have spent more time with. It's always this balance, but you are right. And that's why I like to have seasoned people on, because you've been very successful. But you've also, you've lived a life long enough to know that, well, what's the most important thing? Yes, you want to make some money. Yes, you want to be comfortable. Who doesn't? But there's a limit to where that becomes like, it's not about that anymore. Like it's about being happy and fulfilled. And that's hard to explain to a 30-year-old who's really trying to like just make something happen, you know?
Oh, of course. Well, listen, you're at a different point in your life. You know, people show what they have with, you know, exotic cars, whatever it is. But you realize later on, like you said, and you're young still, you know, 50 is big. When are you 50?
Well, we're shooting this right now. We're at the end of June, so I'll be 50 in December.
Oh, nice.
About
Nice.
5 months,
So
6 months away.
yeah,
It's just, I don't even think about it really.
oh,
I
it's
just
a
look at
big,
it.
listen, it's a big one. Trust me. It's a big one. That definitely was, you know, not in a bad way, but it definitely was different than any other birthday that I had, you know, as far as looking at things differently. But it's
an achievement. In a lot of
Trust me,
ways.
it is. It is. It is.
I feel like I'm just getting started though. Like I feel like the people that I know and the business and like my own just like wisdom, and I feel like I'm just getting started at this point.
Listen, and you are, and it's funny. There's a guy, he's a billionaire. He was Michael Dell's right-hand man. They brought him in because he was like the adult in the room. His name is Mort Topser, and he didn't even make his first million till he was probably 50, and he's a billionaire.
Interesting.
I'm just
That's
saying.
a typical Ray Kroc story, you know, from McDonald's. It's like, I forget how old he was, but what was he? He was in his 60s or something when he hit it with McDonald's.
Yeah. Listen, so, you know, people, you know, obtain success at different times. What's interesting for me, so when I was in this grind, okay, I was angry, aggressive, win at all costs, not friendly, let's say, because I had to be a
Can't
certain
believe
way.
that.
Oh, and now I've been able, over the last bunch of years, I'm really the opposite of that. Like I could sit and chat with you for 3 hours, you know, because I really enjoy it. But back then, no way. 5 minutes, ready to kill.
It's so I don't know you that way, so
no,
I can
but
relate
if you
to what you're
spoke
saying.
if you spoke to people that did business with me, they'd be like, back then they had something called, you probably had it at Deutsche, they had turret lines. So they, you know, they had on the phone, all you did was hit a button and the person would be on the other end.
Yeah.
So my line would ring and terror would be evoked in everybody's mind. No one wanted to answer that phone. Trust me, it was as bad as it could be. So,
Larry, bring me back. So bring me back to, you and I went off on a tangent because we were having fun reflecting on our age. So you gave me 3 things that were super valuable, right? But I want you to go deeper into the mentor conversation, because that's a common theme that I hear from every single person that comes on this show, is the importance of having a mentor. And I was so glad you brought it up. Tell me about what that was like for you.
Well, it gave me what I said before. It gave me stability. It gave me basically an anchor to go to anytime I wanted. And the guy was just great at what he did. So I was able to sit in the room with him, or actually we were on the floor. So we stood next to each other, yelling and screaming all day. But that gave me a really positive, you know, shoulder next to me. But what's very interesting, and I see it now, and I see it at big companies, and I think the big companies are very upset about this. a buddy of mine is the head of M&A at Toronto Dominion Bank. He's in Toronto, and he was
Is that
saying,
TD? It's TD Bank.
yeah,
right?
TD Bank.
Yeah, okay.
So he told me they bring these guys in and no one wants to come to work. And I'm thinking, to sit next to my friend who's been in the business for 37 years, I would sit on the guy's lap to just get his knowledge. And these people don't want to come to work. And I said to my friend Matt, I'm like, what is going on? He's like, I don't know. He goes, but it's weird. So I think the environment's different. These people don't want the mentor. They don't care. They want to do it their way. And it's very interesting, but that's a big dynamic to see how this whole thing shakes out, because COVID, knock on wood, which it's looking like, is going to be a thing of the past, where it's kind of like a common cold or a flu. Hopefully it doesn't, morph into something else again. How are you going to be able to say to someone, I don't want to come to work? I'm going to work from home today. Because
people got
the
warped.
employee, it's like a wrestling match. So the employee now has the employer pinned until they flip the person over. The employee has the edge. So hopefully that changes and people get back to work. But that's what I'm seeing in this environment. So the mentor thing is hard to really obtain, because, like, imagine if me and you worked exactly how we're working now and we talk just an hour or two a day, you're not going to be effective.
It's difficult because I like you have had, like, I've had a few mentors, and there's about 5 that I've always had in mind, and each one was a different point in my life, so they each played a different role. But I don't know that I would have been able to build the company that I have. In fact, I know for a fact I wouldn't have if I didn't have those mentor relationships, because I pull on things, like, still to this day from each of those people, and some of them I still speak with. But you're like, being there, especially the sales side of things. Like, I worked for a guy for 3.5 years. I was the CFO, but I watched him in action every single day when it came to how to build a relationship with somebody that was, like, meaningful, that was, like, real, that it was never about selling. It was like real relationships. I watched him for 3 years do that every single day. And to this day, it's just how I build relationships. I've learned from this guy. And you can't do that over this. You can't do it over Zoom.
No.
You're right.
So the environment's a little bit different. So on the mentor side, I think it's important to get back to where we were. That being said, it's a different world. So maybe we're dinosaurs in the world.
I don't think so. I don't see how, like, at the end of the day, everything comes back to those relationships, human interactions, being able to connect. People want to do business with people. People want to be around people that they can connect with, and it just feels good. And so, yeah, you could do a little bit of that over this, but I don't see how it goes away. Like, it's not possible. People are people. Like, we're still human beings. We still seek the connection. Like, if you and I didn't hit it off when we talked the first time, maybe you wouldn't have even wanted to have this conversation and do the show with me. Like, it's you can feel it, right? So I think it's been lost just maybe on a couple of years of in the workforce, because it was forced upon us. But I see around me, like, little by little, everybody's back to being in person now. And now you see these larger companies that want the workforce to come back in, and the workforce is resisting it. Well, tied into what's going to happen, like, when the next year or two hits us, things get really tight, and everybody's reminded, oh yeah, I do need a job, because the government's not going to keep sending me a check. Like,
oh, exactly.
Oh yeah,
well, listen,
I better go back to work.
Well, that'll be what I was talking about before, the flipping of the employee over the employer. So,
right.
Listen, when these law firms start laying off because they're not doing as much M&A or whatever's happening, if we happen to go, listen, everyone's talking about a global recession. I don't know if it's going to happen or not, but if it does, it's going to be very, very, very weird, because we're in an environment now that no one since I've been alive has ever seen.
That's right.
In 1972, 1973, I remember it vividly. I remember going to a gas station, and they would only, if your license plate was odd or even, you could only get gas every other day. And I remember going to the gas station and buying tanks of gas that we would walk back to our house with to keep in the garage. That's how
Wow.
bad things were. That was the last time that we've had true inflation. And this inflation is actually a lot worse, I think, because this is not only strict inflation versus pricing, there's also supply chain issues that are just humongous.
And
right
war
now.
at all at the same time. You know, Larry, I speak to people, like I was out with people last night, family, and they're all talking about like, yeah, we're planning a trip to Italy next year, and we're doing, and I sit there and I'm like thinking to myself, are they not, does nobody realize what's happening around us? Like hello, this is happening. This isn't a joke.
Well,
Yeah.
you know what I think, though? This is what I think is very interesting, and it's part of the time that we're in. So the way I look at it is like this. So I'm a certain age, but my mother is 82 years old. Okay. She doesn't have time on her side. So she was stuck in her house for 2 or 3 years, terrified of this thing. And now she has the ability potentially to travel or do whatever she's going to do. Or even people that are our age. We've lost 2 or 3 years. We want to go to Italy because we haven't been to Italy in 4 years. So I think people are looking past the fact that the economy is bad. If you were able to go and do what you wanted to do over the last 2 or 3 years, things would be significantly different on that side. So a lot of people, I think I'm calling it, I would call it forced travel. So like there was
That's
a
a great
point in time.
perspective. That's so true.
Yeah.
That's what's going, and that explains the people around me, like that I mentioned last night. Like that is exactly what it is. They're
Well, they're
a little
not worried
older. They
about,
want to
they're
travel.
not right. Well, they're not worried about going broke at this minute. They'd rather go
Yeah.
somewhere where they haven't been. I mean, you see what's
true.
going on with airline travel is insane. I mean, you can't even get a flight.
It's crazy.
It's crazy. But that, listen, that probably will change in the recession or in whatever is coming. But right now, people they want to live for today because they've lost 3 years, whether you're 80 years old and lost 3 years, or you're 60, or you're in college. Like my youngest son is going to be a junior in college, and his senior year of high school was, second semester of that year was shot. No prom, no graduation, nothing. Then he goes to the University of Wisconsin for a full year. He lived in an apartment off campus. So, they were able to do, but when we dropped him off last year for his second year, I'm like, hey, show me around the campus. He's like, Dad, I've never been on campus. So, it's, I'm glad I'm paying all that money, but, he never attended a class in person till last year, and literally 2 years are down the tubes. So it's, it's an interesting world. So I think a lot of stuff is sort of upside down or pressed up because people don't want, God forbid, COVID hits again and you're trapped for another year or two.
People are thinking about that. I love this perspective you have, actually, because I'm thinking about it just in terms of like retaining what you have, and kind of being conservative. But what you're saying is so true. It's, when does it ever happen? There's the 2 years everybody's locked down, then we're loosened up. Yes, the economy is getting crazy around us, but people are, and that explains why, wait, it doesn't make sense. People are still spending.
But here's the thing that I think is very interesting. So I've been around the investment community for a long time, and in my neighborhood, I've lived in my neighborhood, the same neighborhood, for basically 27 years in the same neighborhood. So people know me. They know that I'm in the market in some capacity. They don't really know what. But when things got bad, I'd go to dinner. I felt like a doctor. Like people were coming up to me. What do I do? Do I sell? Do I buy? What do I do? it's a different world now. No one asks me anything. Like, because I don't think people think they've lost money because their house is appreciated more than anything they could ever lose in the stock market. So if you bought $1 million house 2 years ago, it's worth 2 million or more, you know? So,
I bought a house
even
a
if,
year ago for $1 million, and it went up to, on paper, about 2.2.
right,
And I mean, I see already that it's a huge, like, frequent price drops in my neighborhood now. It's like every week they're dropping pretty quick now.
right.
So I want to, as we wind down, I want to, on that note, I was planning to ask you this, just because you've seen a couple of bubbles. And so how far do you see that? So we're in a hot market in Florida. It's super, super over, like, it's a big bubble. You see a 50% drop, you see a 20% drop. Like, where are our prices going to go?
Well, before I give you that prediction, I'll give you a little funny. So my son, my oldest son, who's 30, married, he was looking in a neighborhood, the neighborhood I live in that he grew up in, and he was looking at houses pre-COVID. Everything we looked at, I was like, you can't buy it. It's terrible. Don't buy, don't buy. So I want to give you that disclaimer because I'm wrong by at least 100% and he hates me. So, so I think he's expecting me to kick in the difference in what it was to where it is now. So I'm hoping it goes down. But my thought is that I've lived in my neighborhood. I've never seen prices go up. Especially the way they have now. I bought my home in 2008 at the peak of the market at the time. I knew I was doing probably the wrong thing. I would say I was underwater by 50% on my house up until 4 years ago. And now I would say I'm up a minimum of 100% on my house. So that's the swing that we've seen. Do I think prices could go up from here? Definitely not on the high end. Over, a couple $1 million. I don't see it.
So
I think maybe, I think possibly. There's a neighborhood, Royal Palm Yacht here. There's a lot of inventory there. High end.
Royal Palm, you're talking about the new ones on Jog Road?
No, Royal Palm Yacht and Country across from the Boca Raton Hotel. Very expensive neighborhood.
I mean, I think I agree with you. I don't see how it could go any higher. But is that a bad thing? So if you see, I saw a double on the price of my house in the past 2 years. Am I going to see a 50% pullback? That means I'm still ahead of the game.
Well, then let me switch the table. Okay. If you do, are you going to be upset? Are you going to be upset if your house goes down 50%?
That's where I was actually going. Wow, you read my mind. So the point is, like, no, we're not going to, our house is going to come back down to where they were. I don't see how it could go back down to what I paid for it. But if it does, I'm not upset.
Well, also, then you have what they call the delta trade. So it's funny, people that don't have see, I'm in the opposite scenario. So I'm in the empty nest. I don't need that much space. So my next move, whenever that is, or if there is a next move, I'm sizing down. So for me, it's a great thing. So I could get out a lot from my house, even though I pay more for the next house. It's not going to matter that much because I'm taking out delta. I'm taking money out. For someone who wants a bigger house, so if you want in 5 years a bigger house, you want your house to go down in value because the next house you're going to buy is going to go from 3 million to 2 million. So your house might go from 2 million to 1.25 million or whatever. So that's where we are now. So in a way, it's funny because people who want a bigger house almost want their house to go down in value because they're gonna have to spend more for the next house.
That's
and then there's people like
my daughter is gonna start driving in 2 years, and I have a two-car driveway. And the houses here by us, they're on top of each other. And so I have one of the smaller houses in my neighborhood. There's no place to park another car. So I'm like, I actually have to buy another house. So I'm hoping, I'm like, wow, if the prices come back down to what they were 2 years ago, it'd be awesome. But that's
where do you live?
I'll tell you after we get off the video.
Oh, okay. This way,
hold on, let me give everybody my phone number, social security number, address. I'll tell you.
Sorry about that.
That's all good. Listen, we do need to wind down, but
Okay.
I want to do this with you on a regular basis. We could talk about it offline, because what you know, and just that perspective, even like what you shared today, it's like, it's unique, and it is sort of generational. You've seen so many decades come and go, and what's happening now is we have housing, we have the people that maybe were so used to only being able to win with Bitcoin and day trading, and so everything's changing. And I want to like talk with you more about that, but we are out of time. But I want to talk more about that.
Sure.
And if we could just inspire people just to think, like to just realize, like, there are certain fundamentals that you just have to remember, then we'd probably be doing some people a service, because people are going to lose a lot of money thinking that, I'm talking about people that are on the younger side, thinking that things are always going to be like this, and they're not. Like
No.
the basic fundamentals always come back into play, you know?
100%. I'd be happy to. We could talk life lessons, kid lessons. I got a lot of experience
experience.
on a lot of levels. Financially, I could talk all day long. I could help people on that as well. But yeah, it's fun, and I actually enjoy it. So I'd be glad to join you at any point.
For sure. Listen, I wrote, I gotta run through this real quick. I made so many notes while you were talking, and I want to sum it up so there's some basics we talked about early on, that just, these things don't change. It's sort of like just the way it is. You talked about being driven, a work ethic, working hard. Those things don't change. The people that have that will always move forward at a different pace than those that don't. And it's okay. It's not a bad thing. But if you happen to be a person that strives for more financially, but also more emotionally, and in every aspect of your life, they all require work. They don't just happen. The ability to adapt. You didn't say it this way, by the way, but I wrote this down. You had said, put in the time. I hear you can't take shortcuts. Like there's no shortcuts. Like you do have to do the work. You do have to, like, you gotta lose in order to win. You gotta fail in order to succeed. And so you really can't take shortcuts. Your story is like, I mean, I'm sure there's 100 stories you can tell about failing in order to succeed, but no shortcuts. Back 87 crash, you didn't quit. You kept on going because you had the fortitude to keep on going. And because you didn't quit, your life turned out. I mean, I don't know your finances, but you became a very successful guy. I mean, with that, for sure. And the discipline that you learned from having a mentor helped you get through that. But it was because you didn't quit at a time when you could have, that you met your mentor, right? So you never know who you're going to meet. You got to keep on going. And the other thing is recognize the mentor. Recognize that there's somebody that can help you, somebody that can give you advice. Be so aware of it that you lean into it, right? And we talked about in our own ways how those mentors impacted our lives. And then the top 3 things that make up a good trader, which I think make up a good business person, are being aggressive and wanting to win. By the way, we mean aggressive in a good, healthy way. I don't mean like road rage.
I don't know how healthy it was, but yes.
Having discipline and being able to weigh risk and take risks that are intelligent, that are thought out, and you've thought about the downside too. Like and I will say, I've taken so many risks, but they've always been so calculated that, yeah, I could have lost, and sometimes I did, but you take enough calculated risks, you do tend to come out on the winning side. And mental toughness, right? Those things were on that list. Not giving up, and it was more, but that's all I can get on that one sheet of paper. That's to me super valuable, and I do want to talk with you again and do this again, because I think we can deliver a lot of value to anybody that watches this, whether it's when it first comes out or 5 years from now. These are timeless pieces of advice. Timeless.
100%. I'm happy to join you at any time.
Thank you. Let me finish up by summarizing something else that you did talk about. So I do this show, and I brought you on because you've done the work. Like you've hustled. Like you're a hard worker, and the thing is that helped you reach your potential. And so that's what this show is about. It's about doing the work and like reaching your potential, right? Don't you only get one shot at this. Nobody's ever lived to come back and tell us that we get a second shot. give it your best shot, and find out what you're capable of. That's what, and if you don't do that, then it's like you're selling yourself short. And I want people to take that away from every one of these shows. But today was a great example of that. So
Well,
thank you. Thank you for
I
coming on and
appreciate
doing
it. No,
that.
thank you.
All right, my friend.
All right.
If
Take
anybody
care,
wants
Matt.
to reach, if anybody wants to reach
Oh.
you, do you want to put anything out there? Do you have a new movie or a book or a documentary?
No,
about yourself?
they could always reach me at Larry at the opportunistictrader.com. That is a website that I run. So they could either take a look at it, they could contact me off of that through email, etc. And if I can help anybody in any way on the market, I mean, that's sort of what I do on a daily basis. So I don't have a problem doing that.
So you're, I mean, 100%, you're still in it. You're still helping people, and anybody that wants to reach you, you definitely are open to a conversation. Maybe you help them, see if something comes of it.
100%.
Awesome. So I'm going to put that information down below. So anybody that watches this, they're going to see that in the description down below, all your contact information, everything about you. And listen, thank you again, man. I had a great time.
Well, me too. Thanks. Look forward to coming back.
All right. Awesome.